Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods on this cold and wintry night. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, sniffling and stuffling, but here on the Boston Neighborhood Network for another edition of Talk of the Neighborhoods. Tonight, you'll meet the new Suffolk County Sheriff. She's Andrea Cabral, an attorney from Jamaica Plain, former prosecutor. She was appointed by Jane Swift just this past month to fill the post left vacant by the retiring Richard Rouse, and she has her hands full as she comes in the wake of the highly critical Stern report on the operations of the Sheriff's Department. Then later on, we'll catch up with City Councilor John Tobin, who'll be joining us. John, of course, elected last year to the District 6 seat, somewhat of a different background. He's also an entrepreneur involved in the Boston Comedy Festival, and he recently came back from a trip promoting democracy in Turkey. We'll find out all about that and more with John. Stay tuned for more of Talk of the Neighborhoods. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back with Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, and tonight, joining me, the new Suffolk County Sheriff. She's a history maker, the first woman in the history of the Commonwealth to hold the sheriff's job, and she's here tonight. Andrea Cabral, nice to have you here. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Boy, that first day when you walked into the jail, did you feel like a history maker? I mean, little tongue-in-cheek there, but this is a department that's been under fire, heavy criticism from the Stern report on labor management relations, allegations of abuse there. Where do you start with a job that big? You walked in there.
Well, in terms of feeling like a history maker, I don't feel like a history maker so much for who I am in terms of my gender or my race, but more of what I intend to do in the department. Even after 2 weeks there, it's so clear what the potential of that department is. And there are a lot of issues, but you start with, I think, getting to know your staff. You start with finding out about the department. You can't really explore the possibilities of the department until you get a handle on what the department actually does. And actually it runs, I mean, clearly it runs. You don't hear, you've heard of various problems, but in terms of the daily operations, there are a lot of people there working very hard to make sure that it runs. And they have a lot of great ideas, and they've not been shy about sharing them with me, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, of course, there were a number of, we mentioned Sheriff Rouse retired, and that's the reason the position came open, but there were a number of retirements, including,
Yes.
I understand, in the ranks of management there. That put you at somewhat of a disadvantage, not having a team in place as you kind of start on this?
Well, I came in, I brought a couple of folks in with me. I brought Elizabeth Keeley as my chief of staff. I brought Steve Tompkins as my director of communications and external affairs, and Liz Conroy as my executive assistant. And these are folks that I've known and worked with literally for a decade or more. So I had some level of comfort coming in with them, but I was also amazingly assisted by Pat Bradley, who's the superintendent of the House of Correction, by Gerard Horgan, who's deputy superintendent, and by Nate Linkoff, who's the superintendent of the jail. These folks were at the ready.
They welcomed you in?
Absolutely welcomed me in. They made sure that I knew what I needed to know starting right off, because there were some immediate, very formal sort of duties that I had to participating as sheriff, and they made sure that I knew everything that I needed to know. I was touring the facilities, talking to staff almost immediately. So jumping in was not nearly as jarring an experience as it could have been because of the efforts of those folks.
Again, she's Andrea Cabral, Sheriff Andrea Cabral, the new Suffolk County Sheriff, just sworn in at the end of last month to replacing Richard Rouse, who was under fire as the head there. And Andrea Cabral, of course, is a former Suffolk County prosecutor, has worked with Ralph Martin, and now is the head of how many people work for the Sheriff's Department? Because it's substantial.
Very large.
And how many inmates?
Between the House of Correction and the jail, there are approximately 1,100 employees and approximately 2,500, I believe, inmates. So it's a very large department, large in terms of staff and certainly large in terms of the number of people whose care and custody we have responsibility for.
Of course, one of the criticisms of the Stern report was that Richie Rouse, in fact, didn't, well, I'm sure he had offices there, but did not actually spend much time, at least at the jail nor the House of Correction. I understand that you're taking a little different tact on that.
I am. I maintain my primary office at the Bradston Street address, which is the House of Correction address, and I also maintain some office space that was intended for the sheriff down at the jail. I try to make it down to the jail at least a couple of times a week. Sometimes my schedule doesn't permit it. But I like to keep contact with the jail and maintain a presence in both facilities. I think you have to be on site dealing with the daily issues and dealing with the staff every single day in order to be an effective leader there.
And what of the Stern report? The situation as bad there or as grim there as it was painted? Labor management relations, situations that led to abuse. There were indictments for abuse of prisoners, allegations of sexual abuse, some of which are substantiated, others that weren't. What did you find there? Do you buy the Stern report? Do you believe it?
Oh, I do believe that the findings of the Stern report are accurate. But what I also believe is that the findings in the Stern report, the problems that were outlined in the Stern report, had their genesis in some management and some leadership problems. The actual behavior was committed by a relative few, given that there are 1,100 employees in the department, was committed by a relative few of the staff. And the problems really, I think, lie with whatever management problems there were, whatever policy problems and training problems there were that could breed that kind of behavior. But the vast majority of the people there get up, come to work hard, care about their jobs, and care about having pride in their jobs. And quite frankly, are sort of tired of being the Suffolk County Sheriff Department employees who did blah, 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 blah.
Right.
They were, you know, it's
Of course, especially the sexual abuse allegations were the topic of some rather sensational news stories.
Yes.
Certainly the Globe, the Herald, and the other major media here in town. It was thought that some of that could be limited by the construction, creation of a new women's unit. Then the Stern report suggested that, in fact, perhaps it wouldn't solve the problem, that it wouldn't provide privacy for female inmates. How do you deal with that topic?
Well, I've been to the facility. It's my understanding that the Stern Commission report, and I don't say this to be critical, I think it's just being accurate, there was no one from the Stern Commission report who actually went to the facility and toured it. I think they looked at sort of a blueprint of it. But I think from the blueprint they looked at, it did not appear that it could be used appropriately for women. I've been to the facility. I do think that it should have been built so that it didn't need to be retrofitted or renovated, but I'm also aware of the fact that in many corrections institutions, they're built just this way. And when you come in and you decide that there are certain things built a certain way that aren't conducive to housing a particular type of inmate, you retrofit and you renovate. And we're looking to see if that can be done in a cost-effective way. Even if it cannot, between our Community Corrections Office, our Women's Resource Center, Brook House, and the various other services that we have for the women there, we can make some changes about where we house the women and how quickly we move them through community corrections for re-entry into society, and we are definitely going to be able to use that facility for something. We are going to be able to use it either to house overflow
So
male
you,
inmates.
you haven't given up on...
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I will not allow that facility to be a $14 million white elephant.
Okay, again, Andrea Cabral, the new Suffolk County Sheriff. She's here tonight on Talk to the Neighborhoods. If you have a question, a comment. We do have a call on the line. Joe from the West End. Joe, are you there?
Hi, Joe. How are you tonight?
Very good. And yourself? Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Same. Happy holidays to you. I live almost directly across from the jail, and I have more of a political type questions. First is, does the new sheriff think the position should be an elective position, or should it be an appointed position and take the politics out of it? And second, if she decides to run, does she turn from sheriff to sheriff candidate? Because I think the election's in a fairly close amount of time, if I'm right.
Well, that's absolutely correct. At least currently, under the current law, you would be subject to election in 2 years, I understand.
Yes.
There have been some suggestions. There's been some reform of county government, abolished in some areas.
Right.
Is there any possibility of that? And if not, are you prepared to run as a candidate?
Oh, I am prepared to run, and I let the governor know that it was my intention to run for the office in 2 years. In terms of the first part of Joe's question as to whether or not I think it should be a position for which one has to run or an appointed position, I understand the argument for having it be an appointed position. People at least have a perception that it being an appointed position takes the politics out of it. I'm not so sure I agree that there's very much that takes the politics out of any major decision in Massachusetts, at least not that I could see so far. But the reason why I'm leaning toward it being an elected position and remaining an elected position is because I think that people have a right to have a say in who runs their jail and their house of correction. It's not just that people have relatives that work there. It's not just that people have relatives who are incarcerated there. It's taxpayer money that is spent for my salary, for the salaries of my staff, and you have a right as a voter to decide who you want doing that job. And so I think to the extent that you leave it in the hands of a voter, you get a much more accurate picture of what the community wants and what the public wants for their sheriff.
Well, of course, there was, interestingly enough, a piece in today's Boston Herald already suggesting that perhaps some candidates lining up to run against you.
I didn't see that article.
Perhaps there's a bit of whimsy, but there has been talk that one or more city councilors, perhaps someone at the State House with political ambitions, might deign to kind of jump into this. It's an expensive business anymore. It's running countywide. Dan Connolly just won election as the Suffolk DA. I think spent well in excess of, I believe, $500,000, and there is a potential to the need for money to run a campaign. Now, I know I read in the paper, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you've already said you wouldn't accept contributions from employees. Is that kind of no pun intended? Are you kind of handcuffing yourself there a little bit?
Well, it's sort of balancing what's appropriate against my needs as a political candidate. And the job that I was appointed to do is Suffolk County Sheriff. It's my job to run the department. I want to set a tone with the employees of the department and develop a professional relationship with them that politics does not enter into. I'm the person that has to get elected. They don't. Their only responsibility is to come in as department employees and do the best job they can do every single day. I don't want to commingle that professional responsibility and that professional relationship with some sort of financial contract between myself and the employees. What that means, having made that choice to run the department that way, it means that I have to work that much harder to raise money for the campaign, but I'm confident that I'll be able to do that.
Of course, there is a prototype, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I read that if you intend to run, and you would run as a Republican. There is a precedent for this. Your protege, I don't know if you call him a mentor, but Ralph Martin, Republican, who ran and was elected in Suffolk County, although most people see this as a hardcore Democratic area, does that put you at a disadvantage being a Republican?
That's not my perception at this point. I do look to both the fact of Ralph's campaign and the nature of his campaign, the way that he ran, and rely on that experience as a sort of a teaching experience. I do consider him to be a mentor. I think that my position is a little bit different, but I also think that political times are a little bit different right now. I think the last election season showed that people are looking more toward people as candidates and less toward party and politics. And they are concerned about how their tax money is being spent, and they want to know that it's going to be spent appropriately. I think that while it presents some challenges, that the current atmosphere makes it quite doable in 2 years.
And I'm playing the devil's advocate here a bit, but does being a woman, does being an African American help or hurt you in that cause?
Being a woman and being an African American has helped me my entire life. I'm not sure. Hopefully that will continue, and I anticipate that it will. I do think it gives me a different perspective. I think when you combine both my race and my gender with my history in law enforcement, it makes me maybe a little bit different and a little bit interesting to a lot of folks. I take sort of a common sense approach to corrections, but it's also very progressive. So I think that there's a lot about the job that I will do as sheriff that will make me attractive as a candidate.
I want to go back to this whole notion of how you deal, though, with the unions, because it seemed to me in reading the report, the Stern report, and seeing the trouble that Richie Rouse had there, that was the source of a lot of it. How do you find that kind of balance to establish a good working relationship in a very difficult occupation? I remember, I always think about there was a report that I heard on NPR, or one of the public radio station, and talking about corrections officers. One of the most difficult jobs there is to kind of go in there and turn on the switch, and then when you're done, kind of turn it off.
Right.
It's hard kind of both ways. An environment that I'm sure is filled with some tension, some pressure, and makes it tough to kind of deal with them, and for them, I'm guessing, in all fairness, to sometimes deal with their managers. How do you create the atmosphere to really make that work? Because, again, in reading the Stern report, it sounds to me like that's the key to it.
Well, I know that I'm going to be bringing an inclusive style to management in the department. That I have been spending and will continue to spend a lot of time just listening to the people who work there, because as I mentioned before, there are just a lot of great ideas and a lot of insight that folks at the department have been providing me. But I have to also rely and trust that department employees are approaching my administration in the same spirit. And to the extent that that's true, then the department will move forward fairly quickly, and we'll make progress. To the extent that it's not, we'll work on those things as they come up.
They reach their hand out, you
Exactly.
are reaching your hand out.
Exactly.
And again, I think some of that had to do with the distance that Sheriff Rouse kept from the union. But, union politics can be kind of a rough game.
Right.
And, are you prepared if it really gets nasty? I mean, sometimes just dig in and, I won't say it's always the case. Most times unions are reasonable, but sometimes they can be unreasonable.
Well,
Just as managers can sometimes be.
absolutely, absolutely. I don't think that there's anyone who's ever tried a case against me or that I've ever bumped heads with that would tell you that I'm not ready to dig my heels in for something that I feel is right and something that I feel is appropriate. It'll always be done professionally, and it'll always be done above board. But while I prefer to do things, obviously, in an amicable fashion and build consensus, if there needs to be that kind of back and forth, I don't have a problem doing that.
Okay, again, Andrea Cabral, Sheriff Andrea Cabral, and very quickly we have Bob on the line from Roxbury. Bob, are you there? And I hope you have a sensible question.
Well, I hope it's considered sensible. Thank you. First of all, I consider you a breath of fresh air, ma'am, in that
thank
position.
you.
Oh, you're very welcome. My question is, what is your position on the control units? I know the American Friends Service Committee, City Councilor Chuck Turner, among others, are adamantly opposed to their continuance. What will be the position, or what is your position on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. What was-
Control units.
The control units in the prison. The American Friends Service Committee, I know, is adamantly opposed to the control units.
Okay, and I'm not sure what you mean by control units. Do you mean the
Solitary confinement.
I
people
see.
put in-
And the
yeah.
segregation units?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think
Okay.
I think that those are necessary. There is behavior that is manifested by inmates at both facilities that poses a danger to the people that work there. You have to have a segregation unit. You have to have control facilities in order to maintain order. There has to be some mechanism for separating out inmates whose behavior is uncontrolled in order to maintain order among the inmates whose behavior is, at least at that moment, under control, so that things don't get out of hand. And I understand their position, the positions of the American Friends and also Councilor Turner's position, but I think that those are common features in all correctional facilities. They are present in the House of Correction, and I think that they're necessary.
Okay, again, thank you, Bob, from Roxbury, our caller tonight. In this first half, we're talking with the new Suffolk County Sheriff, Andrea Cabral. She just sworn in at the end of last month, 2 weeks on the job and digging into a tough job. And unfortunately, we're out of time in this segment. And I appreciate
you.
so much you coming by. I want to wish
My
you
pleasure.
a happy holiday, as well as all of our viewers. Coming up, we'll catch up with City Councilor John Tobin from West Roxbury. John stopping by, and we'll talk about a few things, rent control, and more recently, a trip he took to Turkey to promote democracy. We're going to find out what he saw over there. Stay tuned for more of Talk to the Neighborhoods. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back with more of Talk to the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a bit of history with the newest appointee to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, Andrea Cabral, joining us in the first segment. Now, a familiar face from West Roxbury, the District 6 City Councilor, John Tobin, is joining us. And John, thanks so much for coming by
Thanks for having me on,
tonight.
Joe. I appreciate it.
I was talking about you earlier. I hope your ears weren't ringing too much. I said, while I know you're steeped in experience both on Beacon Hill and now, of course, City Hall as well, you have a little different background than a lot of politicians who maybe people think, everybody's an attorney and they've got a law practice on the side, this, that. I know you concentrate your efforts a little differently. I know you concentrate first and foremost on your job as city councilor, but you've been involved in the entertainment business, and in particular, promoting comedy, and I know you still do at least one big charitable event involving comedy. Tell our viewers a little bit about it, because I don't think a lot of people realize that about
I
you.
just sort of fell into it 10 years ago, Joe, just as a doorman. I was working over at Kiss 108 as a overnight DJ person. 7 people would listen to the show. I do the news and the weather at the top of the hour. I worked for Arnie the Woo Ginsburg, who everybody remembers was a big
Sure.
DJ in the 50s and 60s, and Dick Doherty was opening up clubs, and they were looking for door people, so it was a part-time job, and just sort of evolved into full-time, and started hosting the shows, and then managing the comedians, and then booking rooms myself and running rooms. And so a couple years ago, we decided to bring a comedy festival to Boston that celebrates comedy, stand-up comedy in
Right.
Boston. We have the greatest stand-up comedians in the world.
Oh,
Jay
excellent.
Leno and Conan
Sure.
O'Brien, two late-night hosts that are out of Boston, and Paula Poundstone and Janine Garofalo and Dennis Leary and Steve Sweeney. And so we're going to our 4th year in May, and we bring in over 200 comedians from all over the United States, Canada, and London, right here in the theater district, to sketch and improv. And we've added a movie component this year. We're bringing Bill Cosby into the Orpheum.
Wow.
We have the Hat Shell for a night of movies and shorts and things like that. So it's keeps you grounded on another side. We've started the business up from scratch, so it's good to work with other people and work with budgets and entertainment, and it's been good practice for some Wednesdays in the city council sometimes.
I was going to say, keep you grounded is right, and some days you need that. Of course, we all need that. But lately at the council, a bit of a contretemps over there, bumping heads with the mayor, or maybe that's too strong a word, but the mayor put forth his rent stabilization bill, he called it. Other people call it rent control, and surprised a lot of people, to the surprise of a lot of people. It failed.
Right.
Of course, many people just assumed since Menino was supporting it, that council would too. What happened over there?
Well, I think to a person on the council, we all want to work with the mayor. It's a team effort, and the mayor always talks himself about public-private partnerships. For example, raising $20 million of private money to help bring the convention here to Boston, which I was part of that today over the Fleet Center, the signing, and just really great day for the city and for Mayor Menino and all the hard work that they put in on that. And partnerships in government with Senator Kerry and Senator Kennedy on bringing the convention here, but the partnership should also come a little bit backwards to the city council as well. We want to work with the mayor. It's a benefit to all of us on the council, to the mayor, and to our constituents to work together. But sometimes any family is going to have its disagreements and its feuds, and this was a case where we just had a disagreement. I think the council has taken some remarkable steps in the last couple of years and some new energy on there. Not to say we work well with some of the older, more experienced people on there.
Sure.
That sort of temper our ideas every once in a while. They've been through the mill many more times than we have. But I think the group of us bring some fresh ideas and some perspective out there from the next generation.
The young Turks, so to speak?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, we all happen to be really good friends, too. And, unfortunately, we lost Brian Honan, our friend and colleague this year. And, through Brian's passing, I mean, it brought us, the whole council, closer together, I believe. One thing Brian taught us, he never took himself too seriously, but he took his work very seriously. And he always comported himself as a gentleman. So I think every once in a while when things get a little hectic in the council, people sort of take a step back and think about how Brian would conduct himself, and that's the one of the good things he's left in his memory.
Well, of course, the mayor has vowed to reintroduce at least some variation on this rent stabilization plan in January, and you, in all likelihood, you certainly will have one and probably two new members joining you there. Of course, voters in Allston-Brighton just elected Jerry McDermott to replace Brian Honan, and it's expected that Mickey Roach will resign his at-large post, making way for Felix Arroyo to join. I don't know that will make any difference in the vote on rent stabilization, will it? And is the council open to some kind of compromise? Because notwithstanding the economy, the rents are just are outrageous.
Absolutely.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
Well, the first question first. I wouldn't want to speak for anybody else, but I know that Felix Arroyo, future Councilor Felix Arroyo, did speak on behalf of rent control, the mayor's proposed legislation. So I would assume that he would be for it. It came back before the council, and Jerry McDermott made it clear that he was against rent control. So it really doesn't.
It balances out.
It balances out. The second question, absolutely. I mean, the council. Not only do we vote against the legislation, but it would be irresponsible of us, especially the people who voted against it, not to sit down together and try and craft something, work in partnership with the mayor to try and craft something to protect the most vulnerable people in the city of Boston. And we have done that. We haven't released anything yet, but I can tell you we've met 4, 5, 6 times on the subject. Small groups, larger groups, we have met with the mayor to try and come forward with something and work together.
So there is some attempts. I mean, you're in a rather unique position, perhaps, and some people might think uncomfortable. Many homeowners apparently were opposed to the mayor's plan, and there are several in West Roxbury, and also in Jamaica Plain, but also a large number of renters, especially in the Jamaica Plain section of your district. What would it take for you? What kind of changes to the mayor's plan might you find acceptable?
Well, without getting into specifics, Joe, I think that having the ability to represent, I consider it a great honor to represent Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury, and sometimes it gives me both sides of an issue. Sometimes all three sides of an issue. And for instance, in the race in last year when I ran against Representative-elect Rush, the Community Preservation Act was on the ballot. Myself and Michael both supported that, much to the chagrin of a lot of folks in Jamaica Plain, in some parts of Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury. But I thought it was the right thing to do, and I own a home, and I thought that evenly spread the burden amongst everybody to try and help people. Would have added $14 million for affordable housing in the city of Boston. That was defeated. Rent control came up. I just thought it was just too far-reaching. I thought that there was not enough time. Rent control has been gone for 7 or 8 years, and here we have a piece of legislation that's introduced. We're expected to hear it in one night and then vote on it the next week. Took an issue like redistricting, which we debated ad nauseum for the better part of a year. I got 3 phone calls on it in my office the entire time it was debated. We took it out to the communities, had hearings, had meetings. Still, that wasn't enough for some people. Here's an issue like rent control that is so far, it affects a far greater amount of people than redistricting ever could in 50 years. I thought it was best to sort of slow the train down. Another issue was, we had a 7-hour hearing on rent control, and I sat through every single minute and second of it at the hearing at the chamber. I'm the vice chair of the committee. Maureen Feeney from Dorchester, who's been a great mentor for me in the council, ran the hearing, sat through 7 hours of it, Joe, and not one state representative or state senator from Beacon Hill came down to testify for or against the bill, which tells me something, because there's no appetite for it up in Beacon Hill, because you can be sure that if we were to pass it at the council level, we would be expected to go up to Beacon Hill to push it.
Right. Required a home rule. It was a home rule petition.
Like we do with domestic partnership legislation. So, for the purpose, why sell? As I say, we should be in the business of selling dreams. You should be helping people realize their dreams, and try and craft something that we all feel good about, and that we can all feel good about going up to Beacon Hill and trying to push.
Well, and that raises an interesting question. Some people felt that were wondering how committed Mayor Menino really was to this whole notion, that he was willing to expend some political capital, so to speak, to try and push it through, or was it just a kind of something put out there to perhaps appease, housing advocates and so, others in the city? Yeah.
Well, the mayor doesn't need me to be his cheerleader. I'm a supporter of his. We work well together, I believe, and we do have, like I said, we have had our differences in my short time I've been there, but I think the mayor appreciates that you come to him with a good argument and not grandstand with them and just have conversations. And I've been fortunate to have many conversations with the mayor and work well with him, and he's been through this before. That being said, the mayor, no one in America, not one mayor in America has done more for affordable housing than Mayor Menino in the city of Boston. And I don't want to, we have done a lot for affordable housing. I go up to zoning every Tuesday, Joe. I lose 7 votes every Tuesday. We're going up there for more housing. And that's a fact. We've done a lot, and some districts are even worse than mine, where there's land that hasn't been developed yet. So he has done a lot on that. It's this 40B legislation, this snob zoning law that in other cities and towns, they're simply not doing their fair share.
Right.
And it's time, and I hope that Governor-elect Romney is going to start to hold some of these cities and towns accountable, hold their feet to the fire and provide housing.
Speaking of Governor Romney and Mayor Menino and Boston City Council, a rather chilling headline in today's Boston Globe, talk of freezing local aid payments to cities and towns, which, they've been talking about cutbacks in local aid, perhaps as early as this next year, but no one before has mentioned the whole idea that freezing payments come December, later this month, January, has put a chill over the council. Kind of thoughts about what can and cannot be done in this upcoming year?
I mean, especially, it puts a chill in my bones, that's for sure, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues. I mean, we're at the very grassroots of city services and providing city services for people, whether it's clean streets or good schools or a thriving business district. This is very concerning.
You try and prepare your constituents, those that are coming to you, saying, whoa, slow down. I know you'd like your entire street repaved or lights replaced, but we may not be able to do that kind of thing.
You just try. You don't try. You're as honest with people as possible, and just be upfront with them and say this is the reality. You want to be able to help everybody, You want to be able to walk into Anna's in West Roxbury and say, yeah, your street's clean, your schools are great, the business is great. But that's just not the reality. We live in the city. But I think people, constituents respect the fact that you're out, as an elected official, you're out there, you're listening to people, you're taking the concerns, and they understand there are limits to what you can do. But that's where, going back to partnerships, working with our state representatives and state senators, working with the federal Congress people and the federal government.
Well, and that raises an interesting point, of course, because and you perhaps are the only council you actually. Let's see now, your council, one of your colleagues, Maura Hennigan, an at-large council, you ran against her twice. Michael Rush, who was just elected state representative, of course, you also ran in a race twice against him. How do you do that? How are you going to be able to forge kind of a working relationship with these?
We've already started. We've
Yeah.
already started. I told Maura and I had, Councilor Hennigan and I had lunch the week before I was sworn in last year, shook hands. She even paid for lunch. Buried the hatchet and said, look, life is too short, and we had to work together. And I said, Maura, I'm going to not only work with you, but I'm going to learn from you as well.
Sure.
And that's what's happened. And Maura still being there was sort of a blessing for us because it allowed us to get our feet on the ground. And some of the same folks who've been calling Councilor Hennigan for 18, 20 years were still calling her. They're starting to peel our way. We're crafting our identity as a district council there in Jamaica Plain in West Roxbury. So that worked out well. As far as Michael Rush and I, we get along great. I was just with him this afternoon. We've met several times. We're going to start holding some joint office hours in West Roxbury. I'm going to help him as much. I know how daunting it can be to come in new and sort of it's a new job. And there's a learning curve in any position you have.
Well, he's going to, of course, have a tough first decision. Two Boston's representatives, the current Speaker Tom Finneran and now Representative Byron Rushing from the South End, both seeking the Speaker's chair. You worked up there. That's got to put members of the Boston delegation, in particular, in kind of a rather uncomfortable position.
I'm sure, but we have to go through it every year in the city council, so I'm not going to give I'm sure Michael will do whatever he feels right.
Yeah,
for his constituents. And
what about it? Are we likely to see a challenge to Michael Flaherty? He has kind of changed the tenor a bit, I think, of the council up there, more conciliatory. Some people like that, some people don't. But is he likely to see a challenge?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything. I've committed to Michael. I'm voting for Michael for council president on January 6th. As I mentioned to you before we went on the air, I'm getting married December 29th. And
right.
I told Mike I'm sticking around. My future bride, Kate, I let her know.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have to stay for 8 days so I can vote for council president. So I told Michael, get it over with in one ballot because I have a plane to catch for the honeymoon. So
again, Boston City Councilor John Tobin from West Roxbury. His district includes, of course, West Roxbury, a portion of Roslindale, Jamaica Plain, and do you, under the redistricting plan, will you still have Mission Hill?
Small part of Mission Hill, not as much as I used to have. Michael Ross gets precinct 8 in Ward 10, and I gave up another precinct over near Eggleston Square, but I have the other side of Washington Street, School Street.
Right, you've picked up some West Roxbury precincts.
2 precincts in West Roxbury, which unifies West Roxbury, and actually 2 in Jamaica Plain up in Forest Hills that unifies Jamaica Plain. So overall, I think it's a good plan for everybody.
Anyway, he's here a couple more minutes. You have a question, a comment? 973-4848 is the number to call. You're watching Talk of the Neighborhoods here on the Boston Neighborhood Network. I mentioned earlier and kind of teased the program, but you, of course, are seen as one of the up-and-coming young leaders in this city, and you were recently selected for a rather interesting trip overseas.
Yeah.
And I know we talked briefly about it before, but I always wanted a chance to ask you more about that. How did that come to pass that you went to Turkey of all places?
I was contacted by some people down in Washington, D.C. It's called the American Council of Young Political Leaders. It's been an organization around since the 60s. It's a bipartisan group, and it's a quasi-State Department group, and what it does is it sends delegations from the United States of young political leaders between 25 and 40 over to other countries to sort of study their government, their agriculture. It's a pretty intensive course. So I was actually selected for Russia for the first 2 weeks in June, but my first year on the council and the budget, I had a decline. So I said to them, usually if you decline, they may come back to you the next year, they may not. And I said, well, I said, what else do you have? And they said, all right, well, we have turkey in September. And I said, great, I'll take it. And I hung up the phone, and I said, oh, I'm going to miss the preliminary election. And it was actually over there during September 11th, the first anniversary of September 11th,
Right.
which was very interesting. But we were given assurances that, if there were any warnings that the trip would be canceled. But we left September 6th. We went down to Washington, D.C. to be briefed. There were 7 of us in the delegation. The delegation leader had done a trip to India, and you're selected to run a trip in future years.
All the elected officials?
Elected and appointed. There were 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, 3 men, 3 women, a woman from Virginia, one from Georgia, 2 guy from Kentucky, Kansas, and a woman from San Francisco, and myself. So it was a great, you get to learn a lot about people when you spend 2 weeks with them in a van.
Well, no doubt. Of course, the other part of it is, Turkey is a modern secular state now, but the primary religion is still Islam.
99%.
99%. There has been some rumblings over there. Of course, Turkey's also been pressing to be admitted to the European Union. A lot of issues at play. How were you received over there in American, again, this is post-September 11. What was your reception like over there?
The Turkish people, the hospitality was overwhelming. But the disparity between the haves and the have-nots is just so huge. There is no middle class. I mean, we spent time, and everybody says, oh, you went to Istanbul. Well, yeah, we did. Istanbul and Ankara, the capital. We were also down in Gaziantep and Şanlıurfa, which is in the southeastern part of the country, 30 miles from the Syrian border and 50 miles from the Iraqi border. We spent 4 days down there. Just a totally different lifestyle.
Kurds down there, right?
Kurdish folks down in that part down in Gaziantep and Şanlıurfa, and just an amazing country. And to tell you, sometimes it takes making a trip like that to realize how blessed we are in this country. Right. But learned a lot. I think we met with just about every human being in Turkey. I mean, you're over there, Diamond. We met with agricultural people, toward pistachio nuts. Pistachio nuts are huge over there. Yeah. Cotton is a huge export, textile they make over there. Business people, agricultural people, government people. And the amazing part was that I think everybody in Turkey who's gone to school has gone to Boston University. Every meeting would start off with, oh, you're from Boston? I went to BU, and we knew what street they live in. The rest of the delegation was hating me after the fact. Honest to God, Joe, it was amazing. We were at the first day I was there, I had a Red Sox, we were at the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. I didn't know we were going to a mosque. I had shorts on and a Red Sox shirt on. And they made me put a wraparound skirt on to cover my legs. So we're standing there in line, and 2 guys come up, and Boston? I said, yeah. One guy from the South End, one from Dorchester. They were traveling around Europe, and they were in line at the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. So we talked some city council business.
And of course, what about the food? How was the food over there? And
it's all lamb all the time, Joe. It's after the first 5 or 6 times, it was very good, but after 9 or 10 times and eating it out of a lamb skull, it got a little bit challenging. We went to a McDonald's about the 9th day we were there in Ankara. I think they thought it was an armed robbery. They ate a double cheeseburger and a shake in about 11 seconds.
Again, City Councilor John Tobin, he's here tonight. Our last show before the holidays. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a special show on Talking the Neighborhoods. I call it On the Rocks on New Year's Eve, and we'll be talking about the problems of alcohol and drug abuse at an appropriate time. Tonight, we're having some fun. John Tobin, Boston City Councilor from West Roxbury, is here. Earlier, we had the new Suffolk County Sheriff, Andrea Cabral, and John, unfortunately, there's always more to talk about
John,
than
thank
there's
you so
time
much.
for.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas to you and to all of our viewers. The same. For my producers, Stevie G, Tom O'Gar, Brenda Velez, I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.